Hello, everyone. So this is a bit of a weird one because we are doing this recording just to make it into a video instead of streaming it live. But what we wanted to talk about this month is seasonal affective disorder, which is something that I think a lot of people have heard of, but people maybe don't understand fully or appreciate the extent to which it can affect someone. So I have got Ben with me here today, who also works at Safe in the World. Hi, Ben.
Hi.
Thank you. And Ben is going to talk about his experience with seasonal affective disorder and hopefully some sort of tips and tricks and advice maybe about what we can do to combat it. But just before we start with that, I'm going to go over a little bit about what seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, actually is. A lot of people, when they think of SAD, they kind of think of just normal winter blues and, everyone gets a bit sad this time of year because it's so dark out and that kind of thing. But when you actually have seasonal affective disorder, it can be a lot worse than that because the symptoms you're experiencing are of actual depression in the same way that people might experience depression throughout their lives or at particular periods of time. So the symptoms are not only the kind of persistent low mood and kind of loss of energy and things that you would see with depression, but some of the sort of wider issues that you might see there as well, such as fluctuations in weight, difficulty concentrating, being more irritable, feeling worthless, feeling sort of despair, sleeping for longer than you normally would or less time than you normally would, and then a general sort of lacking in energy and just, feeling actually depressed. The difference with SAD versus sort of general depression is that it comes on with the seasons. It is oftentimes with winter seasons, which is why we're looking at it now, because that's when it's most commonly experienced, but it can actually be experienced during any season, so people can feel fine during the winter months, and then come summer, that's when they start to experience the more severe depression. But the key thing with SAD is that it does come and go. But that can also make it very difficult to identify and to diagnose, because people might think, I'm just going through a period of depression for X amount of time, and then they might feel better, they might seek treatment or be sort of prescribed treatment for general depression, and it can take years for you to realize that it's actually a seasonal pattern and that's what's affecting it. You can read more about it on the Safe in Our World website, which I will link in the description. But what we'd really like to do today is to hear about someone's actual experiences of it, which is what you're here for, Ben. So can you just, tell me a little bit about when you've experienced SAD in your life and sort of what impact it's had on you?
Yeah, so I mean, I've experienced it quite a lot. I come from the Northwest U.S., which traditionally has a massive amount of days. It has the most amount of days, at least in the U.S., of rain and cloudy skies. And even compared to London, London usually gets about like 25 inches of rain a year. And for example, where I'm from, it gets about 40 to 43 inches. So when I was growing up, there would be just huge chunks of time when you really wouldn't have a break in in your environment, where you would have sunny days or days that were conducive to really going out. So what happens to a lot of us, and definitely I'm prone to this, also as someone who has chronic fatigue syndrome, that just straight down the line, it makes you feel exceptionally tired, even if you haven't really, um, exerted yourself right in any way. So even when you wake up in the morning, you've gotten ample sleep already, you still feel like there's a battle there to get yourself up. Also, because you're part of that depressive battle is that your mind and your body knows that the physical environment isn't conducive to go outside. So you're probably not going to go anywhere. So it's a very easy thing for it to, I think, trick your body into thinking, I don't need to activate. And so it just kind of keeps you in this malaise a bit where, yeah, it's hard to feel motivated. It's hard to kind of summon energy and focus. Um, and then that isolation. So then it also makes you more isolated, right? So then the more isolated you kind of get in those episodes, yeah, then people do start doing things like it affects your appetite, and it affects just kind of your productivity and outlook, and then it starts, then it gets to that point where um, you start feeling like, when people feel like they're unproductive, then you start feeling like your use your usefulness, right, is then also lessened, and therefore that just hurts your motivation even further. So it's just this compounding, element, that, yeah, it's easy to conflate that it's just, oh, it's cloudy and gray outside, it kind of makes people sad, and it really just, that exacerbates what's there. So as you pointed to already, like, people can still have these issues when it's not gray and rainy outside. It's paying attention to yourself. If you're prone to, the wintry environment impacting you a lot, then you can just as easily be impacted on the reverse side. And I think it's overall, it's something that drives a lot of anxiety for how we respond to our environment. And if you're not getting stuff like enough vitamin D, or kind of basic physiological elements that we need. I mean, even taking things like getting more iron in your blood and taking zinc and stuff like that, like, those are all, useful things. But if people aren't naturally getting those by possibly being more isolated, especially in like fall or winter, then it's going to be hard, like when summer comes, to also activate, yourself in that same way, because you're basically playing catch up, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see it. But yeah, so it's, I think I think the thing for me is that, especially in those months um, when it is, like now, like fall and winter, is to try and not, and even more so if you live by yourself, to not let yourself go days at a time without connecting with people. You know, if you have an animal, right, pets, that helps too, right? Any kind of connection is good, because the isolation, I think, is one of the hardest things. It makes people feel alone.
Yeah. And it can be so difficult as well in terms of isolation, because this time of year is generally, looking at winter specifically, is generally one where people, it's all about togetherness and it's all about connecting with people. And sometimes when you're feeling so isolated and so cut off, that can be exacerbated by, the outward looking at others who are
Yeah.
having a wonderful time, and who are connecting with the people that they want to. And it can be even more difficult for people who maybe don't have a lot of people around for whatever reason,
Yeah.
to reach out to anyone that they do have
No,
in
that's
their
a
network.
great point. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That it's, yeah, especially in December. Regardless of what or how people celebrate, um, there's a lot of, you know outward emotion and expression of people, yeah, talking about getting together and meeting up with family. And for some, like, that is the one time they try and get together with family, is like in December. So yeah, exactly, for people that don't necessarily have that, or it's a particular year where you don't have that option. um
Yeah, right.
yeah, then those are definitely, yeah, extra elements that feel like they can just pile on, you know um and yeah, and just kind of make it feel like the battle that you're already facing is just made worse because of the a lack of sociality and being able to share in that. But also, I think there's there's an added component of not just outward expression of people getting together, but an outward expression of people like to share a lot in around December of, how well they're doing or things they're buying, stuff like that. And I think that's an even extra element around that. It's just anything um, that people use in the social sphere that is meant to kind of feel like you're building community. And so if you feel like, the natural environment you're in is not giving you any sense of community, and you're just kind of, stuck battling the elements alone, that yeah, it just makes it exponentially harder. That's why, like, if anyone, when people that maybe like don't have siblings or don't, or do live by themselves and stuff, especially, people like that, to make sure you reach out to them,
Yeah.
chime in with your friends and stuff, like that, just to see how they're doing, make time to chat and do something with them. It's just really important.
Yeah. And that kind of leads us really well on to maybe talking about what types of things you do to combat SAD, and what other things that you can suggest. I know you spoke a little bit about making sure that you have the right nutrition and vitamins and things, and obviously reaching out to people being a big one. But do you have any other kind of suggestions or ideas or things that have worked well for you?
Yeah, I play a lot of music in the house. So I also try to play more soothing and cheery music, because that creates a nice ambiance right off the bat. And yeah, I try and surround myself. Yeah, like the more I feel like it is hard to go and venture outside, like today there's several inches of snow right on the ground, so
Yeah.
right, it might be one of those days that it's hard to even go outside, but yeah, so especially in those days, I try and create a cozy environment where I'm at. And actually, when I lived in Denmark, I feel like I kind of became better at this, because it's definitely a badge of pride when I lived there. The term hygge is all about how do you create cozy and welcoming environments. And there's like entire books on hygge. So I love the sentiment of that, is because in some of those places, when especially in the far north, yeah, it's cold more, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
so people do like being able to create, yeah, more just friendly and colorful and welcoming environment. So I think there's a lot to that. It sounds very simple, but if you can walk into if people can walk into your home and they don't feel like they can sense a personal touch of what your space is about, then maybe that is a good sign to, like, do some more things to make your own space feel like yours, because I think that helps build up your sense of identity and your sense of ownership in the space you have. And then when you do feel the weight of those environmental elements, yeah, weighing on you, right, that I think it will have less of a negative impact when you're giving yourself, a physical space that really works for you, speaks for you. um, yeah, so that's done a lot for me, because I've moved around a lot. So as someone who also moves around a lot, there's a lot of people out there like that. It can be hard to feel like you have kind of ownership of your space, because
Yeah.
you're kind of a very mobile person. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that, Rosie, for example, another colleague of ours, has a special light that kind of simulates sunlight, that she'll use and kind of have in the room with her around this time of year to try and get some of that feeling and the, I don't know, trick your body into thinking it's going out in the sun, and that's quite a common treatment for SAD, to have one of those and use it for just a few hours a day. But I do think as well what you mentioned about, making your space feel like yours, and potentially surrounding yourself with things that connect you to what your safe space is is a really good idea. And actually, when you were talking, I had a question, because you mentioned how you've lived in quite a few different places. And do you feel when you were, for example, living in countries where it is a lot more commonly colder all the time, and there's sort of like a culture ingrained around that, do you feel that you struggled less or more, or sort of about the same with SAD?
Yeah, so actually, since, for example, the weather in the Northwest U.S. and the weather in Denmark was very similar.
Mm-hmm.
It can rain a lot in the winter. It can get below freezing, and it can get windy and all that. So you have a very similar natural environment. But what I found in Denmark was, because actually the city that I'm from, Portland, has one of the highest reported numbers of people reporting SAD, like needing more support around SAD, and there is a very high rate of people actually needing clinical care around depression and stuff. So to see that, and then to live in Copenhagen, where there was much more an embrace of not letting the natural environment feel like it's a negative. So one of my favorite things there, not that you can do this everywhere, but was to go winter bathing. And winter bathing doesn't mean it has to be winter. It's just the idea of, even when it's cold outside, would you still go, jump in the water? And in Copenhagen also, the harbor water is very clean, so you can kind of jump in to the river anywhere. But my neighbors would ask me, and at first I would turn it down. I'd say, oh, that's crazy. But they said they felt that it stimulated their blood cells and stuff, right? It actually helped fight against depression and feeling down, and it also wakes your body up and gets your adrenaline kind of going.
Right.
And so then the first time I did it with them, I started doing it like every day. You just jump in cold water for like 30 seconds, and so I mean, it's not like everyone is in a place where they can do that, but I appreciated practices like that, because the whole idea was, there is no weather in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's hot or cold, there's a way you can still enjoy the environment around you, and there's something that it can give you.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. I think too, the idea of um, appreciating creating that welcoming environment indoors is also why people, when I lived in Copenhagen, were very good at inviting people over. So this idea that, if you're going to ask a friend to hang out, you have to most of the time say, well, let's go out, let's meet somewhere in the middle. It's in my experience there, it was more that people would invite you over, over to their house, then say, let's meet somewhere out, in the public, a restaurant or whatever. And so I think that too had a lot to do with being able to fight, SAD more in a place like that. Is that you felt that it wasn't going to be, I don't want to say an excuse, but it wasn't going to be a primary reason for people to say they couldn't, you know, um, socialize or engage in some way, right?
And it's interesting as well, like you said, the kind of winter bathing and stuff like that. That is a reason to go outside in potentially adverse weather conditions, whereas here, people don't generally tend to say, let's go do something outside at this time of year.
Yeah.
And there aren't, other than it can be nice to go on walks and things sometimes, there aren't that many reasons, especially kind of cultural reasons, I guess, or social reasons to go outside and do stuff. And the kind of getting outside, and especially the kind of exercise element of combating SAD is quite an important one.
Yeah. I mean, the getting exercise thing is hard because your exercise, for the most part, kind of has to be moved indoors. Unless you're into ice skating or you live near a mountain where you can go skiing and things like that. But I think there is a big cultural component of, I've lived in places too where, for example, I lived in Los Angeles where, it's a semi-desert, and some people would actually complain when it rained because it rains so, rarely, they don't like it. And so culturally, they're just not used to it. And I would always say, no, this is great. You want some, you need some. So there is such a huge cultural component of where you are and how your community gets used to the kind of environment that you're used to being around. But I think that is why there is an onus that's on us individually to provide ourselves with outlets wherever we can, so that if we find ourselves sleeping for 12 hours one day, it might feel good to like just sleep, but at the same time, even that's not particularly healthy, to be sleeping that long. So even when I've had days like that, I think we have to kind of give ourselves reasons, or create lists, of things that can keep us productive.
It's trying to like keep your circadian rhythm and your body's natural clock in balance. It was interesting how you mentioned about the rain in LA, because when I lived in Saudi Arabia as well, I went for 6 months without seeing any rain at all, and I was miserable about it. Probably because that's what I have been used to from living in the UK beforehand. But 6 months of it being nothing but sort of upwards of 40 degrees was really, really challenging. And similarly, when it gets to temperatures that hot, that gives you the same struggle with going outside, whereby you definitely don't do it as often as you might in sort of more temperate weather. And I think, it's a very kind of, I don't know if animalistic is necessarily the word that I'm looking for, but it's just something about like the base and the core of your being and how your body should work based on the climate that it is accustomed to. And changes in that can be very difficult to manage. And we've spoken very extensively before about the connections of physical and mental health, and when things start to kind of go askew with your body, that's when it can really start to bring on those like depression symptoms and things like that.
I mean, it's it's interesting that you talk about places that are particularly hot, because there is that flip side, to the coin that way. Like the hottest place I've ever lived was Las Vegas, which is one of the hottest places in the U.S. at least, and it is right, and it's right next to Death Valley, which is one of the hottest singular spots on Earth. So it would get around those similar temperatures that Saudi Arabia would get, and when we would go outside and try and do things like do exercise or play a sport or something outside, we would literally have to set a timer for 30 minutes, because we knew that if you were exerting yourself in the sun for longer than that, you could pass out. And so on that flip side, that gives you just as much motivation to feel like you just can't go outside, or you just can't do things outside. Going outside is meant to just get from A to B and then get back inside somewhere.
Exactly.
And living there, in a place like Vegas, that was very much the culture. The culture was not about you plan outside activities unless you're like an avid hiker or something and you want to go out to like the Valley of Fire, which is like a camping, hiking area, and you go outside the city. But in the city, people don't hang outside. you find the quickest path to the next building.
I apologize for my cat being vulgar back here.
Oh, it's awesome. But yeah, like that's that's just as easy a way for people to feel like they're kind of isolated when you feel like it can even potentially be dangerous to be outside for too long, right?
Yeah,
On the
exactly.
hot and cold end of the spectrum. And so yeah, in both cases, people just finding ways to still make things work, because you know what it's going to be. Like if you live in a place that's hot all the time, you know that's going to be, that's a constant.
Yeah.
So it's not like you don't have time to kind of plan your actions, for how to make life work for you. And the same with people who live in a great place. Honestly, I moved from the Northwest US because it affected me too much. I needed to be, somewhere warmer, and that's not always an option for people. But I definitely encourage people who feel like if where they are doesn't feel like it's conducive life-wise for them, to consider, being willing to look at other places if that's in any way an option for them. Because for me, it felt like I needed to. Um, that I needed to live in a different kind of environment. It was a big battle living in a place that was honestly very gray and rainy all the time. I looked at the weather report for the next week, for like the town that I grew up in. Rainy every day, every single day. And yeah, like that. That's gonna be the typical. So
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I guess to summarize what we've talked about over the last almost 30 minutes, you can read more about seasonal affective disorder on our website, which I will link in the description for this video. And Ben, did you want to summarize potentially just a couple of the things that have helped you in combating SAD just before we wrap up?
yeah. I mean, making my personal space at home particularly colorful, and playing music and personalizing my space as much as possible has been something that really helps me, because then it makes what's happening outside kind of seem less important, or less impacting my psyche. But also scheduling myself, like creating things to do, even if they don't seem like super important things to do. Giving myself a reason to have an alarm,
Yeah.
even on a day where you don't have particular things to do. Um, yeah, it is another good one, so that you feel like you have some sense of urgency, especially in the mornings, to activate yourself, and get yourself going. um, yeah, those are some of the best things that have really worked for me. And giving yourself any chance you can to have sociality, to have some community with other people, like not letting yourself go days completely by yourself, even though that can feel comfortable for some people.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. And to anyone watching or listening, if you do feel like you're struggling, you can find a wealth of different resources in all different regions across the world on our website, safeinourworld.org. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.